then we have the being aspect as well. And that is sort of our embodied way of relating, the unconscious way of relating both to ourselves and to others and to the planet. And I think that if this transition or transformation of society is going to be successful, then that is very much dependent on our individual transformations. Mm-hmm. And those transformations are not going to be only transformations of our thinking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It has also to be connected to transformations of our being.
What is this place? What is happening here in Ukraine? It's basically the border where East and West meet. So this is a quite interesting place because it seems as if all almost ideologies or cultural codes meet and crash here in Kyiv or in Ukraine. And where, if not in Ukraine, could we ponder and think about new ways of global governance? Like, imagine if Ukraine could become a place of co-creation between strong opposing cultural codes and political forces. That would be, for me, a major endeavor to achieve something like that. And I don't know if something like this Emerge gathering or the Meta Modern Arts Festival can help to sow first seeds of co-creation and of emerging new societies we need all over the world, but which we most needed here in Ukraine.
So we're here in Kyiv. Yesterday and the day before we had the Emerge gathering here.
Yes.
That was a very fulfilling and deep and touching experience, I think, for everyone.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And we're here with Thomas Björkman, who is the, I would say, initiator, from my understanding, of this Emerge gathering.
We are.
How would you describe your role?
Yeah, we are three partners in both the gathering and the media platform, the Emerge media platform.
Yeah.
Whatisemerging.com, and that is the Ekskärret Foundation in Stockholm, the Oak Island Foundation.
Yeah. I heard a lot about the island already here.
Okay, great.
By participants. Must be a special place.
It is. It is.
I'm curious to get to know it.
You should. And Perspectiva in London, and the cocreation loft in Berlin. So those are the three partners in the Emerge project. And I'm involved in all three of them.
Okay.
So yes, I have a central role in the Emerge project, and also I have been managing the Emerge gathering in Kyiv and making that happen.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
So if you say you had a part in all of that, how would you describe your role? What is your role in this network?
So I don't even know if it is a network. It's definitely not a formal network. You might more call it an ecosystem.
Or even a community already?
Not yet. No, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think ecosystem is
ecosystem,
a better word, because some organizations and some people are more central, and then some more a little bit peripheral, and then even further out.
Yeah.
And in some of the more central organizations, I've been either the founder or a co-founder of those organizations, but certainly not in all of them. We have very central organizations in the ecosystem where I have played no role in the creation of the organization. But when the aims and purpose are aligned, of course, then cooperation comes naturally. And I would say that this gathering in Emerge and also the Emerge media platform is a way to make this ecosystem visible to itself and to help and support even more cross-pollination and cooperation and inspiration across the various organizations or people in this ecosystem.
Wonderful. I think I would like to touch upon 3 subjects. First, I would like to do a small recap of the previous days.
Yeah.
What was happening here in
Yes.
Kyiv at the Emerge festivals? What were, from your perspective, the most important line of thoughts, or what was emerging? That was sort of the ongoing question, was what is emerging in the world, in society, in the individuals right now at this moment? Maybe we touched upon some answers. That would be nice. Then you're also an author, and you've written books on philosophy and how to create the world. That's more or less the title of your latest book.
Yeah. Co-creation.
Yeah, co-creation.
And
exactly.
how the world is a process of co-creation.
Yeah, wonderful. And from there we can go straight on to the interest of our foundation, to be how co-creation can become a part of global governance processes. Maybe just some first ideas. But that's maybe good. Sort of the outline.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
So coming to the Emerge gathering, what was your personal process with this? Or did you get an insight, or did you have some moments of deep reflection where you felt really touched, or that we as a group touched something?
Definitely. And perhaps I should start to frame a little bit the purpose of the gathering and who were gathered and what at least I myself think is going on in the world right now. So I think that we are in a huge shift in society. I think we could even talk about a paradigm shift. And of course, throughout history, we have had a number of paradigm shifts occurring. And the reason why we have had that is, of course, that as technology evolves, society evolves, and the way that we organize society and the way that we look upon ourselves, upon society and the world has changed. And the last time we had a real deep change in perspective, a real deep change in worldview, was during the Enlightenment, when we went from a religious, dogmatic way of looking at the world into a scientific, rational way of looking into the world. And that new worldview, those new glasses that we took on, helped us to evolve tremendously and has been so helpful in creating this society we live in today. Nobody would want to go back to a medieval society, of course.
No, not really.
So it has given us everything from technology to modern medicine and human rights and democracy and all of that. But at the same time, I think we more and more start to realize that it is actually this particular way of looking at the world and understanding the world. There's a little bit outside perspective and instrumental perspective is actually causing a lot of the problems that we see today. So I think we have somehow exhausted the potential in this worldview, and that now this worldview that has helped us so much during the last 200 years is actually killing us and our planet.
Yeah.
And we see that more and more. And it's not just the environmental problem, that is of course the most visible, but I think actually that many of our collective problems, international injustice, the psychological ill health, meaning crisis, and all of these crises are actually just symptoms of one underlying, let's call it meta-crisis.
Yeah.
And that meta-crisis is the fact that we have outrun the potential of our paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
So something new will have to come.
Okay.
And historically, these paradigm shifts have always been an emergent process.
Mm-hmm.
Something is dying, you have turbulence, you have chaos, and something new emerges.
Yeah.
And the purpose of this gathering for these days was really to feel into that emergence and see if we could try to sense and understand what is emerging. But of course, we are not just spectators to this emergence.
Yeah.
We are also its co-creators.
Yeah.
So at the same time as we are trying to sense the emerging future, we are also co-creating it. And we are co-creating it a bit in the dark because we do not know what's coming.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting situation.
Yeah.
But it's also, of course, a very critical situation, because if there is anything that is going to take us out of this predicament, this meta-crisis, it is us actually co-creating this emergent world, which is an emergent process that cannot be managed because it's a complex self-organizing system, so we cannot make plans for it, but still we are able to at least facilitate it.
That's a wonderful framework. And now if we break that down to these 2 days, I mean, my impression was you managed, and the organizations here being involved managed to really gather from the perspective of co-creating the future, a crowd of high potentiality. I was really impressed by the potential of each and every one of the participants here on all aspects, cognitive aspects, the way of being and being emotional and getting in process and in touch and relation with each other.
We were really overwhelmed by the interest in this gathering. We had planned to gather 90 people. That was our plan, and I think we were 180 or something like so that, without and not being marketing it too much, so that there is an appetite to try to understand what's going on. But I should also say, just adding to what I just said there, that I also think it's important to say that this emergence in any complex system can always go two ways. You reach these sort of bifurcation points where the system either face a breakdown or a possibility to organize on a deeper, more complex, generating more freedom. And I think we are at one of these points. So it can go either way. And one of the critical things that we were sort of trying to understand is there any way that we can increase the possibilities of the society taking the higher part rather than going down into a fragmented and new dark age.
And in a way, this Emerge gathering is a sort of a kind of lab for 2 days and 180 people, you said, something like that, to experience and to try out what can happen and what can emerge if these people...
And what is emerging, and how can we support that emergence?
Yeah, and would you say something did emerge? And if yes, what was that?
Yeah. For me, the greatest experience during these days was actually during the second day. We started the first day quite cognitively with different thematic explorations. We had those people who are interested in new political system. We had the initiators of a few new political parties in Europe here interested in this. We had people into new economic thinking, discussing about if technological development and blockchain technology could help us to come up with a new economic system that could take more care of the environment and of us as people. We have people that are interested in personal inner development and the inner aspects of all of this, our cognitive capacity and our possibility to have a lifelong development of both the cognitive capacity but also our capacity for compassion, and how that could be a key aspect. People interested in spiritual aspects. So we had these thematic explorations
on the first day.
That was quite a lot up in our heads thinking about these things. But then one thing that I think is very clear is that this transition, if we're going to be successful in this transition, it's not just going to be a cognitive transition. And I myself, I'm quite focused on the thinking and doing aspects of life. I've been a serial entrepreneur, and as you mentioned, I'm written some books, so I'm very much into doing and thinking. But then we have the being aspect. Then we have the being aspect as well, and that is sort of our embodied way of relating, the unconscious way of relating both to ourselves and to others and to the planet. And I think that if this transition or transformation of society is going to be successful, then that is very much dependent on our individual transformations. And those transformations are not going to be only transformations of our thinking. It has also to be connected to transformations of our being.
At what was it? It was sort of the final forum of today.
The harvesting of the first day of Emerge Gathering.
The harvesting of the first day of Emerge Gathering. That's exactly. And we were talking about the day and our experiences and conversations we had. And I found it very interesting that actually, even though we attended completely different sessions, we touched upon the same subject, would you say?
Yeah, like the holographic part of self.
Yeah.
So we're meeting in an Emerge Gathering of like meta perspectives, and we're tasting the same kind of themes.
Exactly. So would you like to explain what you experienced today?
So my experience is coming here with the intention of showing up and finding my piece of the puzzle in this meta-modernity, which I have passion for. And the first thing that emerged here for me was like there's an open space for facilitating the conversation on the internal structures of what's going on with the environment. So the internal voices and that kind of anxiety that's very, very vivid in the world. And being from Sweden, yes, with Greta is here. So I tap into feeling that.
You are
with
from
her.
the country Greta is coming from.
I'm from Greta's country. Yeah.
So does it do something with you?
It does something with me.
Yeah?
It does something with my nervous system. I feel when she's in this, like, I would actually say a bit neurotic. It is. It is. She's tapping into the like anxiety and existential crisis.
Okay.
And I see that's on a personal level with her, but it's also in the collective sense of Sweden or the big world. And its environment, and it's existential, and it's from the internal, and I feel
and that is basically where your work is located as well, because you told me in the session we just had that you're really interested in kind of embodying the outer process or channeling how would you describe it?
I would
This
just-
embodiment process?
Yeah, I would describe it as seeing that your internal world is manifesting as external. So whatever I have working with in my internal world, which some people don't believe it exists, but I've had my shift of going like from kind of science only that like headspace connection into like, oh, this is actually true, and whatever I'm tapping into then manifests in the external.
In the external. And
yeah.
is that also a reciprocal process? So that the external is manifesting...
Exactly, because it's
in the-
feedback loops.
Okay.
Everything's loops, and that's even neuroscience. So like you're a strange loop in this thing. So everything's a feedback loop. And so if I can hack that feedback loop, if I can hack that in my own nervous system, if I can look at my own patterns, if my own pattern is existential, like, there's a change happening now. There's a phase shift. There's something culturally happening. That's why we're here and seeing what's the next stage, because we don't know.
So we both touched about on this inner outer process, personal transpersonal reciprocity. Well, coming back to greater, my quest or my project at the moment is to explore co-creation as a cultural technique for global governance processes. So basically what Greta is doing, she's at least pushing something on a global level. There's a lot of resonance. I wouldn't say that we are already there, that we start co-creating, because that would be much more proactive towards solutions and innovations. But Greta is often obviously touching upon many people or touching some internal process.
But actually, I'd like to
Yeah.
speak to what you're saying right
Yeah.
now is like the resonance.
Yeah,
And Greta has that.
yeah.
And even Trump has that.
Greta and
Yeah.
Trump have
And-
that
and
resonance
it's-
with what?
the
With the climate
resonance,
crisis or
peop-
with
yeah, actually,
global?
They're amalgamating attention.
Okay.
Amalgamating attention through emotional content.
Yeah.
And what I see is like there's a lot of blaming.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like, you should do
Yeah,
this,
like
you're not doing
The
this.
older generation.
Exactly, and that
Like
is of
us.
course, yeah, and yeah, of course, and like looking at age, I don't want it to be about her, but of course, like levels of development and seeing that, yeah, it's you, and blaming, but
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
integrating that. How is this me? How can I shift myself? And for in that sense, like shifting my emotional relationship to grief and my emotional
and-
relationship to existence, and that's where I practice. Well, I've been in integral Zen and Tantra and shamanism in that sense, and there's different ways of tapping into like what's the transpersonal voices,
Yeah.
what's the contractions,
Yeah.
and can I meet my contractions and like biohack those
Yeah, yeah.
and
sure.
have more
But
liberation in that sense.
that is
Yeah.
technique everyone can learn
Yeah.
for themselves,
Yeah.
basically.
yeah.
But is there also something we can learn as a society? Like, can this technique be applied to collectives as well?
The frank answer is I don't know, but there's also I hope so.
But we should find
yeah,
out.
exactly.
So I attended the first workshop, and we wondered if it is really enough to tell stories about our thinking, or if we should actually convey our own inner processes as part of the artwork with which we do our storytelling. Because if we see our personal process as a mirror or as a sort of as synchronized with the transpersonal process of society, then we might be able to make some deep storytelling about social processes by showing our own process through the format of video storytelling, for example. And some of the participants in the workshop noted that, of course, the internet is a public space and we would make ourselves quite vulnerable. I'm not quite sure if this is correct, because if we try to tell our personal stories as a transpersonal facilitation of what is happening in society, yes, on the one hand side we make ourselves vulnerable, but on the other hand we also show the vulnerability of society itself. And in the end, this is what the Global Resonance Project is about. It is about me using myself as a tool to sense and to experience and to process what is emerging in society at the moment. So I'm really interested in what is happening at this Emerge gathering here and the Metamodern Arts Festival later on. If something new is emerging, or if we manage to somehow facilitate and show these personal processes on the collective basis of this community here. That for me would be the success of a meeting like this, not being a normal conference, but being a place where people share their minds, emotions and spirits and thoughts to get into this deep personal and transpersonal process, to then come with emerging ideas for future society.
But then we have the being aspect.
Yeah.
Then we have the being aspect as well. And that is sort of our embodied way of relating, the unconscious way of relating both to ourselves and to others and to the planet. And I think that if this transition or transformation of society is going to be successful, then that is very much dependent on also on our individual transformations. Mm-hmm. And those transformations are not going to be only transformations of our thinking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It has also to be connected to transformations of our being.
I just went over the Maidan here in Kyiv and I'm really deeply touched. I don't know why, but the Maidan is closed for traffic. People are walking the streets and there's a very calm and gentle atmosphere here. And yesterday at the Emerge gathering we talked about the Ukrainian people and the Russian influence, and this is really deeply moving and touching to stand here on the Maidan where the protests for democracy have taken place, and knowing that the Russian army is just a few hundred kilometers away and that the people here are living under this constant threat and fear and have to struggle with these disinformation campaigns from all sides, really. We spoke about the assumptions of the West, especially of the left in the West, that the Maidan protests were just a sort of fascist uprising, as well as we spoke about the fake news and disinformation campaigns from Russia. We spoke about the Crimea and the occupation, and to be standing here on the Maidan without any cars around, just people walking calmly the streets on a Saturday morning, having their coffee, some first tourist groups looking around, that is deeply moving and touching. And I don't know why, but I just took out this camera to capture this moment. I'm just standing here. Maybe I can take a few shots of the atmosphere here, but yeah, I don't know yet what to make out of it, but it's a strong moment here.
So at the second day, we started in the morning of trying to see if we could make collective sense making.
Mm-hmm.
Because individual sense making we are all fairly good at.
Yeah.
And during the last 100 years we have in the Western world become more and more successful in supporting individual agency.
Mm-hmm.
Now today we are very much in control of our own lives and have a lot of individual agency. But at the same time it looks to me a bit like when it comes to the collective agency that we are actually perhaps worse today in being able to exercise collective agency than we were 100 years ago. And of course, most of our individual challenges are individual, and we can use our individual agency to solve them. But many, if not all, of these crises that we were talking about earlier, again, not the least the environmental crisis, have components that requires collective agency.
Yeah.
Yes, I can decide to recycle. I can decide to fly less, but I cannot decide individually. We cannot decide individually the way that, for example, the market in its present implementation does not really care about the environment.
Yeah.
So if we should change that, which I think we need to change, then that requires collective agency.
Yeah. So it's a collective sense making and a collective process, and in the end it also leads to collective governance.
Yeah, collective governance. And to me, living in London, and the Brexit process that we are going through there right now, and so on, I think we have a breakdown in collective sense making and collective agency.
So with the Brexit, we maybe have the blueprint or what we don't want to have, how we don't want to do this, and how a completely dysfunctional governance process looks like.
Yeah, and of course that's also a good example of where we need collective sense making and collective agency. Yeah, because we cannot decide for ourselves that I want to live in a Britain that is part of EU, and you want to live in a UK that is not part of. We have to agree, and the same for the environment. We have to agree the fundamental rules of the market and the fundamental rules of how we engage as a collective.
So, and you think at the second day of the Emerge gathering, this is what was happening?
we were running 3 labs on collective sense making, and to see if we could have a collective intelligence emerging in a group
Yes.
that was actually more than the sum of the individuals.
Yeah.
Again, if you look at the collective sense making going on in many places in the world today, it looks like the collective intelligence is actually less. Most of the individuals in the room are more intelligent than the sum that we are able to produce.
Yeah.
And of course, the goal would be that the collective intelligence is greater than the individuals. And in doing that, you need to have sort of a possibility for the individuals to be able to lean into that process as individuals,
Yeah.
bringing in their own individual agency and sovereignty in a way. Not for the process just to result in the smallest common denominator. It's very important that you bring yourself there as an independent individual,
Yeah.
but then also being sensitive for what is emerging between us. And this is a very energetic and complicated process, and it's possible to do in smaller groups relatively easy if you know how to do it. But what I experienced for the first time actually in my life was that we had in the group of the 3 experiments that we were running, the group where I participated, we had 100 people in the room, and we were actually able to achieve this state of coherence and collective intelligence in the group of 100, and I never participated in that before, and that was a strong emotional experience for me as well.
Could you describe that? What kind of emotion was that, or how does that feel to be in a group with a sort of collective epiphany, maybe?
I think it's very difficult to describe because we are not trained to do this. Even so far, I mean, in our societal systems, the need for this is not even recognized. I think in organizations, we are starting to understand in startups and in smaller, very contemporary organizations, self-organizing organizations, we are starting to understand that there is a need to learn how to do this in a good way. But it's not something that we have a good language for. But if I should say anything there, it's a bit about coming into coherence, being open and really listening into the field between us, but at the same time being independent enough to bring your perspectives into this.
I felt over the 2 days that, at least from my perspective of experiencing these 2 days, the first day I touched very often upon the subject of inner and outer process, or inner transformation, how inner transformation and outer transformation are kind of mirroring itself. We talked a lot about embodiment and how to feel what we actually think or perceive in society, in ourselves, etc. And we also touched upon the subject of fear and fragility, and also sadness in the context of we as individual in this huge transformative processes and what they do, and that we not feel we can somehow steer or manage or maybe even control this. And then the second day in these labs, and then we had these fishbowl discussions, this came up on a very personal level. I mean, we had people, the whole attitude was very calm and solemn, and people were speaking from their heart and from their deep feelings, and we had moments where people were really deeply touched and almost started even crying or laughing. We had nice metaphors on on giving birth to something.
Yeah, yeah.
And how the experience, some women talked about that, how the experience of giving birth could be a metaphor for what we're experiencing in a process of emergence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was quite touching and deep. I still wonder what was the moment, or was there a moment of collective understanding of something, or was it more like that in our being we could feel we had something in common? Or would you say, no, there were certain 2 or 3 results we stumbled upon?
No, I think there's 2 or 3 PowerPoint results. I think that's the old way of thinking.
Exactly.
And I think what happened in this process was that we both got a collective understanding. I use the word understanding because it is cognitive, but it also, as you say, it's a feeling and it's intuition and it's feeling into something. Because if we take all of that as an understanding, I think we all got some sort of collective understanding of the process of emergence and the process of where we are today. And one example, I think we all felt that this urgency that we feel, that urgency can be a part of the problem.
Yeah,
it could be part of
You're
the
right,
problem,
that was
and also that the fear that we also feel. Sometimes fear is a good thing because it makes you run away from the lion. Yeah, that's good. But sometimes acting from fear is not helpful.
Yeah.
And I think in the situation that humanity is right now, I think we all got an embodied understanding that acting out of urgency and fear will not help us. And that's a bit like the metaphor of giving birth you said there. If you are acting, giving birth from a perspective of urgency and fear, that is probably not helpful.
So maybe one interpretation of what was happening could be that in a situation of urgency and fear, of collective urgency and fear, rather than trying to control and steer the situation, we have to find a common ground where we as a community or a society calm down to be able to give birth to something in this emergent way we experienced as a group here.
Yeah.
So
I think so. And again, making it a bit more concrete and understandable. Going back again to Brexit, or also perhaps the situation in the political situation in the US. I think a lot of what we see in politics today is driven by fear, and that is not helpful.
And what we learned here is maybe to step back, calm down, get into some collective sense of being, and from that let the new things
because we know, of course, from an individual perspective, that when fear takes over, our intelligence, individual intelligence, goes down.
The reptile brain.
And you get the tunnel vision. And lower intelligence, and that is not what we need today. And it's even more evident that is happening on a collective level. So the collective fear is decreasing the collective intelligence and tunnel vision, and we're looking for the simple solution, and if we see a simple solution, we go for it. We go for Brexit. We build a wall. problem is
Yeah.
solved.
That's a very beautiful thought, and I feel it sort of, it was flickering all over both days, basically. I just remember in the evening of the first day, we had this nice exercise of doing a glass beads game after the novel by Hermann Hesse.
Yes.
And it was the attempt to bring a sort of bring two people in the flow of not discussing, but in the flow of
Co-creating a story.
Co-creating a story, narrative on a very complex subject.
Yeah.
And I've been in this exercise with a young woman, Jascha,
Yeah.
and our subject was utopia.
Okay.
And we started with telling us a story about utopia, a narrative about utopia, which was very sort of the ideal life, the ideal society, and so on and so on. And as the glass beads game progressed, we more and more touched upon a very similar point, so as if it was a premature reflection of what was happening the next day, that we noticed that in order for utopia to be a good utopia, we'll have to embrace fear, imperfection. We have to let things be the way they are, just for them being the way they are. And that only out of this we can sort of come down to a deep sense of calmness in our being.
Yeah.
And that would be much more utopian than sort of the perfect totalitarian ideal of
absolutely.
society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But for me it's important then, of course, that once you've reached that state,
Yeah,
then that is the state from which you need to act.
exactly.
You need to act. Because
Yeah.
if we don't act, then we will not be co-creating a good world.
Great experience.
Yes, thank you.
These 2 days.
Yeah.